started. So welcome everyone. Before I introduce our speaker, just a few kind of points to go over. Remember to turn your phones off. Also remember, if you have to leave during the lecture, I know some of you might because there's classes, to just be gentle with the door and sort of ease it because it can bang quite loud. We are videotaping, so that can disrupt things, so please be careful there. Also, this is our last talk of the semester, and I think it's been a really fabulous term for talks, and a lot of people have put in a lot of time and energy, and I'd like to thank Natalie for her work organizing a lot of this. I know Jesse, I don't know if he's in the audience, he did a lot of work this term. Darren did a lot of the work on the videotape, and I know there's others, so sorry if I missed you, but anyway, thanks for everyone for their efforts. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Susan Barlow this evening. As many of you know, Susan did her undergrad here, and a lot of us had the pleasure to work with her here and also in other capacities professionally, so it's great to have her back. Susan Barlow is a multimedia artist currently based in Berlin, Germany. She recently graduated from the MFA program at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Trondheim, and both Natalie and I had the pleasure to go there and meet with Susan when we were there, so that was great. She, while there, she received awards from the Art Council of Norway, NBKH, for her ongoing artistic research examining the ecology of the self and non-human material world. She also holds a BFA from here. Barlow has exhibited in solo and group exhibitions internationally. Some recent exhibitions include
Værnes.
That was close. At RYMD in Iceland, Kyoto Hanga 2016 in Kyoto, Japan. Only by Analogy at Peggy Phillips Gallery in Los Angeles. She received numerous grants and awards, including a Royal Canadian Academy of Arts, the Alberta Foundation for the Arts grant, and Edmonton Arts Council grant. And finally, her work is in numerous collections, including the Bruce Peale Special Collection here. She has a wonderful artist book. Do check it out if you have a chance. Shunwei Art Museum in Shanghai, and the graphic editions in Bentlager, Germany. So the final thing I want to say, which is really important, she has an upcoming solo exhibition, and I'm going to try to say the title. 63 degrees, 26 minutes, 58 seconds north, and 10 degrees, 25 minutes, 55 seconds east, which is the coordinates of where the work was actually produced. And it's at the Multicultural Heritage Center in Stony Plain. The opening is this Saturday, December 9th from 1 to 3, right? So it's great. You can see the actual exhibition, and please do come out for that. And it's up until March 1st. So without further ado, please help me welcome Susie.
Thank you, Sean, for the lovely introduction and invitation. It's an honor to be here. I certainly wouldn't be doing what I'm doing without my nourishing years at the U of A. This is my senior printmaking class from 2013. Many of my closest friends today are people that I met here. I'm sure you'll notice their imprint on my practice. In this talk, I will walk through the past 3 years of my practice. I'll go through the first year rather quickly and focus on these past 2 years in Norway. I remember when I was first writing my grad school applications. This book, Vibrant Matter by Jane Bennett, was rocking my world and expanding my perception of non-human matter. I had also just read Natalie Lovelace's essay accompanying Liz Ingram's exhibition in Bavaria. Liz and Bernd are dear friends of mine and mentors, and so I knew I must have known it to be true in some way, but the way that Natalie had articulated this collaborative relationship between Obed Lake and Liz and Bernd's practice, it just felt like everything was coming together, and I hit a kind of tipping point into a new paradigm. As I've been preparing for this talk, I've been completely steeped in the writings of Donna Haraway and Wanderlust by Rebecca Solnit. These women have a way of helping me shake off the dust on old assumptions and ask a new set of questions. I have also been completely taken with how cinematographer Agnes Godard, who has a 25-year-long collaboration with director Claire Denis, with how she frames and reconstructs worlds through her cinematography practice. All of this has proved to be an insightful place to revisit the past 3 years of my practice. And I say all this not only to give credit, but also to celebrate how bringing a thought into being comes from a rich and cumulative life of resonances that stay with us somehow. I feel that the most important stage of any given project for me is setting up the ripe conditions to pay attention to whatever it is I'm dealing with. This basic posture of learning how to be attentive is the anchoring point in my practice. During my undergrad, I was very focused on the relationship between humans and the environment. Although my language and understanding has evolved since then, I continue to think through this fundamental relation. And it always leaves me with more questions than I started with. Now I would say that I'm trying to find form for this web called ecology that entangles us. How can I think with and act with my multi-species community? And what is already happening right in front of me? And is there a way for me to engage with it? Within a month or so of graduating from the U of A, I had an exhibition at the Drawing Room entitled As Body to Body, from the words of Bernd Hildebrand. I lay beneath a bed of moss for an hour each afternoon, breathing, squirming, animating the mound from below. I was trying to highlight the agentic capacity of matter, and as a performer, to position the human body in a non-hierarchical way in relation to the living blanket. I learned afterward that the scenario I presented was less surreal and unworldly than I thought. Facebook user Brian Nuttall posted a video of the earth breathing that went viral right around the time of my exhibition. As it turns out, under very particular conditions, this really can happen. This video was taken in a forest on the Bay of Fundy in Nova Scotia. Extensive underground saltwater channels make it so that tree roots cannot extend into the subsoil like they normally would. Instead, they stay quite shallow beneath the topsoil, interlocking with one another. And occasionally, when there's a combination of strong winds swaying the trees from above and high tides surging into the groundwater system, the vast root network undulates and lifts the mossy forest floor. So then I left for Germany. I met up with 3 friends from the U of A at Kloster Bentlage, a printmaking residency near the Dutch border in Germany. We had a lot of fun there. I was in between degrees, and I took the opportunity to risk an experiment. All the works I did during this time came from following my nose on daily meandering walks through the forest floor and farmland surrounding the residence. This piece came first and signaled my move away from the gallery, doing more site-specific outdoor stuff, a clear epilogue from As Body to Body. I wanted to learn in a body knowledge kind of way, what it's like to actually be in between these layers of forest floor mulch and soil. When we first arrived, this hayfield was brimming with hay. Soon after, a machine had come to cut it and arrange it into these neat rows. And even though I grew up here in Edmonton, surrounded by prairies, somehow this exchange between the hay and the machine struck me anew. Like a drawing, an interplay of patterns from entirely different logics, and I wanted to join in. So one day I snuck underneath the cut hay and dragged myself along with my belly and forearms along these straight rows. The freshly cut stubs were dry and stiff, so it became more of an endurance piece than I anticipated. I didn't complete the field, but I think I managed to entertain the foot traffic passing by. From the outside, it looked like a giant blob-like inchworm munching its way forward. A couple days later, the rows were churned into bales, along with my discreet insertion of time spent burrowed beneath the hay. I was drawn in by the paths of wood-eating beetles, moss growth, and tree trunk knobs. With what I came to call the Luma Project, I went into the woods with biodegradable gold paint, and I traced and imitated these patterns with very minimal gestures. I hoped that these marks would illuminate the array of non-human mark makers. I really wondered if I should include this work or not, but I decided to keep it in for comic relief, if nothing else. I had this beautiful image in my mind of a row of people floating down a river, linked together in a long vertical line. They would float passively, allowing the current of the river to choreograph the shape of the line. I managed to convince 2 other artists in residence to do this with me, floating on logs down the river. And as you can see, it just looks exactly as it is. 3 women in their underwear performing this bizarre and uncomfortable task. This serves as a good reminder for me that I need to start working with material as soon as possible so that I can have time to let go of the fictional image in the mind and figure out how to work with what really ends up happening. I saturated my hair in gold pigment and stayed perched in a stream until water had washed it away. The shimmering gold line traces flow patterns that carry runoff from the forest and hayfield on either side. Perhaps these golden lines are doing what I'd attempted to do in the river float session, holding a paintbrush to another force, water, and letting it take over. In 2015, I was invited by the Works Art and Design Festival, actually by Lucille Frost, who's here now, to propose a temporary public work for Churchill Square. I drew upon a lost Edmontonian practice of planting potatoes in your front yard when you move in. This is something that my grandparents did, and apparently everyone else with a lawn. Potatoes infuse soil with nitrogen as they grow, making a nutrient-rich beginning for a plot of land. At the time of this project, we were beginning to see developments of an unprecedented wave in the downtown, of investment into the downtown core. New artist-run centers were sprouting up, and Don Iveson was 1.5 years into his first term as mayor. I could sense a common enthusiasm towards the city, anticipating this forward movement. So throughout the duration of the festival, the work staff, the public, and I tended to a potato garden on the city's front lawn. I made giant beanbags to make the space hospitable and offer a different way of being on the square. The theme of the festival that year was making space. And for me, projects like this that alter the architecture of public space, at least they have the capacity, I'm not sure if I did it, to draw attention towards how space is being used, to reimagine how it could be, and to be a catalyst for critical thinking about urban infrastructure. When the potatoes were ready, the work staff held a harvest celebration where they were dug up and made into a meal. The soil was given away for guests to mix into their gardens at home, and the Works continues to use these bean bags for festival seating. And then, too shortly after, I moved to Trondheim, Norway to begin a 2-year MFA program at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. I plan to continue along the trajectory of the site-specific performance stuff that I've been working on in Germany. In order to engage in this sort of work in a new environment, I felt like I needed to first shake hands with the place. I would walk the same coastal trail each day and try to experience the place firsthand. The path I walked is a well-trodden one, from a key Viking trade route to an ancient pilgrim trail, a poverty-stricken pastoral area, and a strategic Nazi stronghold during the Second World War. Today it's home to one of the wealthiest populations on Earth, and the trail is where locals go to get their nature fix. The cultural value of being active outside is deeply ingrained in the society. But most of my research was much more basic than this. I was drawn in by the qualities of the seaweed, how they inhabit the section between low and high tide, a territory that cannot be privately owned in Norway. Seaweed is in between mediums, a thick conglomerate, swollen with air and water, undulating with the waves. And then, under the pull of the moon, they undergo the relentless cycle of tides, audibly puckering as they become parched and crisp. I eventually began bringing my camera on these walks. The process of framing helps me focus and learn where my attention is guiding me. At the same time, I would try to work in a way that took seriously the propositions of the place. There were numerous days where I went out with a specific thing in mind to film, and by afternoon I realized that I had failed. It wasn't looking how I imagined at all. If I was able to accept this failure, I could then relax into seeing the place anew, less clouded by my own prerogative. And then often I would see something remarkable and begin doing the real work of the day. Here's a perfect example of this. I noticed this shipping pallet float by at the beginning of my walk in an industrial harbor. I didn't think much of it besides a grumbling annoyance of waste mismanagement. I was trying to film the visible junctions of water textures from opposing currents and wind streams. But for whatever reason, I couldn't quite capture it on camera. The shipping pallet continued on the walk with me. Sometimes things bob along in a current about 50 meters offshore and don't wash up. They just continue along the Trondheim fjord. And this seemed like the perfect thing, this seemed like the thing that I was really looking for. The shipping pallet that had expired its manufactured purpose and had escaped on a journey of its own. And at the end of the day, just as I was getting rained out, I took this photograph, and in it you can finally see the contrasting water textures. And floating along in their own way are the Sunday kayaking club, a flock of birds, and that shipping pallet. I progressed with this work into taking longer durational shots with more precise framing, which I refer to as field recordings, and you'll see them in the exhibition. This video that I'm playing now was one that I felt especially lucky about when I was filming it. I caught the tide at the perfect moment so that these sea plants could stand tall but yet hunch over as they broke the surface of the water, and there was this unique silty quality that day. I was hoping for a 20-minute recording, but at about 8 minutes in, this styrofoam cup washed up into the frame. I instinctively reached out to pan the camera away from it, but I stopped myself. I didn't quite comprehend why at the time, but something about the action of excluding this styrofoam cup felt irresponsible to me. My whole research process from then on can be thought of as unfolding this very instant, examining what exactly happened from the moment that literally the light reflected off of the styrofoam cup and hit the retina of my eye, to when I reached out my hand to pan the camera away from it. There were deeply ingrained patterns of evaluation and response packed into this instant. So I began examining styrofoam in my studio. I decided that I should get to know it in equal measure to the seaweed. I committed to gazing at styrofoam for half an hour each morning before I started my day's work. And you know when you stare at something for long enough how it starts to move? This happened every session with styrofoam. And the slippage, it challenges the way that I see the nature of reality. Normally I trust what I see, but when my visual field signals something other than what I know it should, I'm reminded of the unreliability of the sense, and hold the information I receive from my surroundings with a looser, more humble grip. This exercise helped me to momentarily free styrofoam as a symbol, rendering us nameless and faceless, ready to experience our cohabitance in the most basic way.
Styrofoam and I conspired together in the scandalous, collaborative act called breathing. Tiny styrofoam bits are agitated by an air circulation system and sent afloat in its streams. As I inhale in styrofoam's presence, its traces dance through the tender detour of my lungs. As I exhale, I propel a host of bacteria and cells from my body into the same microatmosphere that fills styrofoam's pores. Although styrofoam does not breathe as we know it, its structure is 98% air. As long as I remain in the room, I am entangled in the steady cycle of cross-pollination.
I kept on wanting to learn more about this material. Tumbling down the rabbit hole of curiosity led me to the Waste Management Center in Trondheim, warehouses, and I'm still trying to find more about the circumstances of its invention. Apparently it happened by accident in 1839 by an apothecary in Berlin of all places. To the best of my knowledge, I mapped out the history and pathways of styrofoam and began thinking of my actions as yet another detour on its path. One interesting thing that I'd like to point out on this timeline, because especially as a member of my generation, I think we often forget that plastic was once a celebrated invention. In 1958, French industrial group commissioned filmmaker Alain Værnes to produce a short film on the plastic production in their factory. I watched this film for the first time last year on a 35mm projector, the Transmediale of Art and Technology in Berlin. I was completely amazed by the dramatic course that plastic has been culturally narrated into throughout its lifespan. Perhaps today's version of this kind of cinematography would be an Apple product video. And then fast forward half a century to when I saw that floating styrofoam cup. What I really saw was a symbol for our colossal scale of pollution, our role in the ominous catastrophe of climate change. That is what comes first, anxiety and fear. then guilt. That my species produced this waste, that my lifestyle demands the production of plastics, and that I don't know any other way. And then the coping mechanisms come in, because all of that was too much to handle. I would pick up trash at the sites I would work with, which is of course great to do. But I think it was at least partially motivated by the desire to position myself as one who saves the environment and distance myself from those that destroy it. This was a great illusion designed to uphold an idea of who I would like to be, so I could rest at ease, feeling as though I had done my part. Unfortunately, that's not how ecology works. We are all entangled in the system. The material surrounds us, and the work is never over. I have found suspending judgment to be one of the few ways forward in learning what the material is and my reaction to it than I otherwise would have, being clouded by shame and all the baggage that I attached to the semiotic symbol of styrofoam. When we have a more accurate understanding of what we're dealing with, we can respond with greater accuracy. But as long as we avoid really looking at the issue, then we will only know a fiction and proceed with a response appropriate to a fiction. Donna Haraway writes, caring means becoming subject to the unsettling obligation of curiosity, which requires knowing more at the end of the day than at the beginning. End of quote. I like thinking about artistic practice in terms of caring. And I think the ability to hold two contradictory ideas at the same time is vital to a healthy and accurate understanding of our role in ecological crisis. It means the ability to say, yes, I am involved in being a perpetrator, and not to stop there, but continue investigating the state of things, what the issues really are, and what an appropriate action means in that moment. One of the central questions that guided me through the work that I made with Styrofoam and written on the wall of my studio here is, how can I inhabit contradiction, both in the project itself and as my role as an artist? I see much of my role in this project as bearing witness. I'll briefly explain a couple of the main characteristics of the term witness that I'm referring to as I borrow it from the court of law. Being a witness comes with great responsibility. As opposed to a passive bystander, a witness actively vouches for what they sensed. And as an artist, I see it as my responsibility to think through what I'm contributing, in what context, and what is at stake. There are also always two locations: the original thing that first draws me in, and then bringing it into the gallery or public in some way. The event is transposed through memory and the digestion of practice, where I churn things over and over again in the studio and somehow decide on what actually to do with what first beckoned my attention. Throughout my MFA, there were a few directions that I almost took but didn't, because I realized that it would mean adding fuel to a fire that I thought I was so valiantly stomping out. The impulse to censor out the styrofoam cup is a good example of this. So one of the final gestures of the project was so these were actually the blocks that I was staring at every morning. And they really are like 8 feet tall. So I took these large blocks of styrofoam back to the coast from the location that I had first gathered them in. I asserted them vertically, a gesture that is kind of doing the opposite from panning away from the cup. I photographed the setup with an analog format, large format camera within the visual canon that monuments are traditionally composed. The photographic document can ironically be seen as harkening back to the history of plastic, a monument that celebrates human ingenuity. This is a motif that, believe it or not, still persists today if you look at the websites of styrofoam manufacturers. And within the concept of the Anthropocene, it could be read as the mark that we leave behind, a part of the memorial to human civilization for the post-human world. But the predominant way that I see this photograph functioning is a sober acceptance of styrofoam's material presence in the world. I refuse to avoid their existence any longer by dragging them out of the ditch and asserting them vertically in stubborn pursuit of becoming well acquainted with the current reality we inhabit. I'll begin to wrap up by returning to the title of this presentation. Filmmaker Trondheim says that every work of art arises in relation to. I'm finding that the more I can be aware of this evolving relational space, the more interesting the conversation gets, and the further the work goes. Me stands for my subjectivity in first person, everything that I show up with, all that I have inherited and learned, and the materiality of my flesh, the weight of my footsteps. Material / place / other, they all have a history and power of their own worth listening to. The lens, it sees something different than the eye, and this inevitable disparity must be accepted and worked with. I think the same could be said of other tools of production, which give us something different than what we had in mind. The I stands for the other self that shows up every once in a while, to observe what I'm doing, to show me my subjectivity for what it is, and to see my actions from a distance. At the very end of my time in Trondheim, I filmed Værnes at a Scandic airport hotel just outside of Trondheim. For me, this work contains the concepts I had been dealing with, but at more of an arm's length distance. I can't decide personally if this is a closing scene to my work in Norway or the opening scene for what I'm about to do next. I suppose time will tell. And I'll leave it at that and let you see the work for yourself. The screening will conclude my presentation and open the discussion period. It's 6.5 minutes long, and here it goes.
time for some questions, I think.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
So
Turn this one.
I wonder if you could just say a little bit about how you understand there's like a utopic drive and a dystopic drive that I see throughout the work. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you negotiate those two.
Are you speaking about the Værnes work?
Just like all across
Oh,
everything
okay.
you presented, yeah.
Something tougher. It's a good question. I might have to continue to think about it. I feel like at least the dimension of utopia that is imaginative, I feel like is one of the few tools that I've found in moving forward. Because sometimes I feel like I spent so much of my MFA figuring out all the ways that I didn't want to work. And then, yeah, that's why I'm so drawn to Haraway now, is I feel like she's someone that's so committed to the world and to ongoingness. And so that's kind of the dimension of utopia that I'm interested in. The dimension that I'm not interested in and trying to refuse is the kind of romantic, just the romanticizing of not actually seeing what you're looking at, like these romantic landscapes in Norway, which is, I mean, probably part of the reason that I first moved there. So I'm seeing this in myself. And trying to just identify them more often, and so that's the part that I'm trying to refuse. And dystopic, I feel like it's just a necessary part of processing all of this for me, is realizing when you actually force yourself to look at the issue, often it's worse actually than I ever thought it could be. But then I think the hard work of it is to then stay with it, and then it kind of comes back to this utopic, like that. For me, that's one of the how-tos of ongoing. Yeah. Sean?
How did you come upon this space?
Yeah, I had this idea stuck in my mind of using an indoor swimming pool for this, and this particular pool was actually because my supervisor, there's only one public swimming pool in all of Trondheim, and there's so much programming at it, it's impossible to get any kind of access in this way. But my supervisor, she lived just outside of Trondheim in Stjørdal, and she actually took her kids to this swimming pool when they were younger. And she's a very nice woman and was just able to ask the owners, and they just gave me access from when the pool was closed to when it opened again in the morning.
And then a follow-up question. Most of your work you have yourself as if there's a figure.
Yeah.
I think this is the first time I've seen you use someone else.
Yeah.
What was the decision there?
I think that, I feel like that maybe why I always use myself was because that was the most important controlled variable for me, was the figure. But I wanted, in my work I kind of wanted to take a step back in perspective and have the main gaze be the gaze of the lens. And so, I just really felt like I had to be behind the camera. Yeah. Liz?
I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, but a project that you did where you stared at a fluorescent light
Yeah.
for quite a long
I
time.
forgot about that.
And then I see the styrofoam, and I remember that whole time when you tried to, in a way, equate that process of staring and being enveloped in this fluorescent light with crawling under moss or something like that.
Yeah.
So I see the same impetus. Am I right? Or
Yeah. No, it's interesting that you bring that up because I forgot about that. I felt like there was something maybe more aggressive, maybe, in my impulse to stare at the fluorescent light. Like I just wanted to confront it in the way that it was actually in the basement of like where the fundamentals drawing studios are, and they have these like really aggressive fluorescent lights on the wall that just come right at you, and I was like, I'm gonna lock horns with this thing. So that was kind of the initial impetus behind that one. But so I don't know if I don't think at the time I was thinking about staring at the fluorescent light in the way of like that I was thinking about being present with the moss. But that's what I'm trying to do now with the styrofoam. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah.
I see like a bit of a life cycle throughout the video footage. Did you note any kind of a life cycle in the styrofoam in nature as well?
Yeah, I kind of traced it to the best of my ability, where it would start with like crude oil deposits, because that's where plastics come from, and then in the manufacturing process to, I suppose you're kind of more so asking about the later end of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it depends on the city that you live in and how they dispose of it. I suppose that would be like the designed pathway that it's supposed to take, which of course doesn't always. In Trondheim, if it's perfectly white styrofoam and if you deliver it yourself, then they have a third party that will pulverize it and mix it into new styrofoam. But the rest of it, they just incinerate with the rest of the trash, which if burned at the right temperature, it yields like 10% ash, and the rest is like CO2 and water. I think it's in my diagram actually. And then the ash they use in road construction, making asphalt. But yeah, I mean, as far as like the escapees or migrants, as I call them, that's what you see on the beach. And actually in Trondheim, the sand, it's not really sand, it's just really tiny, sharp stones. And if you pick up a handful of the sand, you'll find these like polystyrene beads in every handful. And so I don't know exactly the further breakdown of that. I know I'm probably going to botch this, but it actually is one of the examples that Timothy Morton uses in his definition of hyperobjects. So objects that radically outscale human time, so that it's not biodegradable in that sense. Yeah. Gab.
Hey, I really liked in your videos how you just set intention and then sort of like chance would like intervene and then do something that spoke like far more towards what you were interested in.
Yeah.
I was wondering, like, is that something that like you now like are open to and like hunting painting for? Is that sort of like unintentional, like accidental moments, and like how
Yeah.
much this, like what you control versus like what you don't control? How does that factor into your practice?
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm kind of at this point where I've been preparing for this exhibition in Stony Plain, so I've still been reworking work that I had started during my MFA and composing sound for it and stuff like that. So I feel like now, like the new year is the point that I'm really gonna begin what I do next. And I mean, so in a way, I don't know what that is, other than, I guess, one collaborative project that I'll be working on. But in terms of my own practice, that I would say that definitely will always be there. Like this kind of dance between like going out with something and then, but really, really working to remain open to what it presents. I think that I would like to maintain that in any project that I'm working on. But yeah, I mean, how it factors, I still feel like I need to go out with something. So there's something that I go out with, which is my subjectivity and my intention. And I think it's important to have an intention, but kind of, I guess, this loose grip that I'm working on having. So yeah, it'll be there for sure. Yeah. Kim.
You mentioned at the start of your talk how the most important thing for you when you're beginning a piece of work is to make sure that you have the ideal setting to really pay attention. And I was wondering what kind of thought you have given to when you're showing your work for doing what you might do to make sure that the people viewing or encountering your work have that same kind of environment that really lets them pay attention.
Yeah, that's a good question that I've been sorting through very tangibly this month with installing in Stony Plain. Yeah, I feel like it changes in every context. Like I would say an easy example of this, or a straightforward one, would be the potato project. Like it was really important for me that people would actually spend time in there. And I feel like it's easy to think like, as you're an artist and like in the idea stage, that like of course people are gonna spend time in it, but then if you don't design for that in the architecture of the exhibition, it just won't happen for at least many people. So that was why I did the bean bags entirely. And then, yeah, I think it's also how I would edit videos, like with this Værnes work, like working on, I mean, not having too short of cuts to really direct what someone should see, but not having too long of cuts that people just walk away. I mean, that's something real in video work especially. So yeah, it's something that I think about a lot, and to some extent you just can't fully control it. But I think, yeah, I actually feel like a lot of galleries should have movie theater seats, just like really comfortable chairs. I don't know why it's all this like minimalist benches, because I mean it's also an aesthetic of its own, but yeah. We'll see. Roy?
I was just questioning, curious of your comment early in the talk about material. You didn't quite say the word craving, but what's the interest? What's the desire you have about material that you might be leaning towards right now? Searching for.
Yeah, I think that I guess in my early work, it was maybe more coming from a dualistic thinking perspective of trying to get to know the other, but then I feel like now my wanting to get to know other materials comes hand in hand with getting to know myself. Like I'm composed of material, and even only like 10% of my cells are marked with my genome, I just read, which is crazy. And so yeah, I feel like that like cultivating an attentiveness towards like material, as in like the material that I'm dealing with in a project. It's, yeah, I feel like it's maybe how I make sense of the world, or yeah, getting to know the world and myself, I guess. Yeah. Bernd?
For the videos, there's always, in most videos, there's always a sense of an anticipation, and anticipation is sort of related to storytelling. But then, when I see the videos, and it finishes, it's been more about like a meditation and storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts? Which way does it go, or is it important?
Yeah, for me, I'm I guess less interested in narrative and storytelling in like, I guess in a traditional narrative sense. Yeah, so for me they're more about the kind of state that you're drawn into when you view than, say, like the story of the figure, for example, or the circumstance in the video. Yeah.
How does it relate to the process of the meditation for you?
Yeah, I suppose I'm really interested in the state that I have been in when I view certain artworks, and also when I've meditated, is this kind of moment when you feel yourself kind of having departed from one understanding of yourself, but you haven't quite arrived at another. It's this sort of hovering that, I mean, I've only felt for moments, but yeah, I would say that that's something I would love to like create for people through these video works. It's kind of when you're drawn in by something and you just feel this like leaping out of like your own world or paradigm. Yeah. Pardon?
Where your mind wanders and finds
Yeah.
points of attachment.
Mm. Yeah.
Last questions? Or? Okay.
Thank you.
Congratulations.